A Mercedes-Benz X350D Power is sitting on a Victorian dealer's yard right now with a windscreen price of $36,888 and 128,334 kilometers on the odometer. When that same ute was new, the list price was $79,415, and the press car everyone tested came in at $90,745 before on-road costs. Nobody was getting much change out of $100,000, so a 90 grand truck roughly 6 years later for the money you'd pay for a tidy second-hand hatchback. That is not a sad story. That is an opportunity, and it's the reason I keep an eye on this end of the market. Because here's the thing about the expensive utes. When a manufacturer builds a flagship, the engineering budget goes up before the badge does. Thicker chassis rails, bigger brakes, proper full-time four-wheel drive instead of a part-time system with a lever. 6 cylinders instead of 4. Then the price gets set somewhere north of 70 grand. The first owner takes the hit, and 5 or 6 years later, that hardware is available to you at hatchback money. I've had enough dual cabs up on a hoist over the years to know the difference between a ute that was actually built better and a ute that just got a bigger screen and some contrast stitching. And today I'm only interested in the first kind, 7 of them. Australian delivered, Australian prices, and I'll tell you exactly what each one costs now, what the ugly bill looks like when it lands, and whether I'd put my own money on it. And running underneath the whole list, there's a number, 1 ton. It's not an engineering number, it's a tax number, and once you see how it shaped these utes, how much they could carry, how they were priced, and who was ever really expected to buy one at full retail, the entire collapse in their value stops looking like bad luck and starts looking like arithmetic. One of the 7 has a payload figure that 2 reputable sources cannot agree on, and the gap between those 2 numbers is the difference between 2 completely different vehicles in the eyes of the Australian Taxation Office. That one's coming up third. Before the list, the frame, because it'll save me repeating myself 7 times. Almost every one of these utes was bought new by a business, not a bloke saving up. A business with an ABN, a logbook, a GST registration, and an accountant who could make a $75,000 purchase feel like a $50,000 purchase. That's who these were priced for. The showroom sticker wasn't set by what the ute was worth to a private buyer on a Saturday morning. It was set by what a company could carry. You are the second owner. You get none of that. No deduction, no GST credit, no fringe benefits concession. And that is precisely why the price falls off a cliff at the 4 to 6 year mark. The entire pool of buyers who made the original number make sense has moved on to the next new one, and the ute has to find a home in a market that pays cash for what it actually does. That's the comparison I'll keep coming back to. What the first owner was paying for versus what you're paying for. They're not the same thing, and the gap is where your money is. Number 1, the Holden Crewman Cross 8. Start here because it is the cheapest, genuinely over-engineered ute this country ever produced, and because the way it was built is completely mad. The crewman took a Commodore's unitary front section and bolted it to the full ladder chassis out of the 1-tonner, joined by 2 vertical uprights running off the front of the ladder frame into the back of the cab. On the Cross 8, they then added all-wheel drive, extra bracing, a live rear axle, and the 5.7-litre Gen 3 V8. Nobody will ever do that again. As one of the old hands in the classic ute world put it, turning a monocoque family car into a full cab chassis with its own extended wheelbase, special cab, low-volume all-wheel drive transmission, and live axle takes an engineering and tooling commitment that could never make sense a second time. New, it was 51 Chabon 990. In 2004, money for a ute. Today, the private buying guide on a 2005 sits around $10,000 to $12,300, and the real listings back that up. $1,150 for a 2004 with 196,500 kilometers. A bit more for the good ones, silly money for the low-kilometer collector cars. Now, the honest part, and it's the same honest part every time on this list, the fancy version carries less. A 6-cylinder rear-drive crewman was rated to carry 1,070 kilo and tow 2,100 kilos braked. The Cross 8 dropped the tray rating to 738 kilos while lifting towing to 2,500 kilos. Hold that thought. Also, Owners report urban consumption climbing above 20 L 100 kilometre, and people who tow with them fit an auxiliary transmission oil cooler and change the fluid often. The 4-speed auto is the weak point, not the engine. Buy the one with the service history and the cooler already fitted. That's the whole strategy. Number 2, the Nissan Navara STX 550, the D40 with the V9X V6. In 2010, Nissan did something nobody expected from a mainstream ute brand. They put a 3.0-litre V6 turbo diesel and a 7-speed automatic in a Navara. It launched at $69.90, which made it the most expensive 4x4 dual cab pickup you could buy in Australia at the time, and the option pack pushed it to $64,990. Output was 170 kilos and 550 Nm, with a curb weight of 2,197 kilos and a gross vehicle mass of 3,010 kilos. Do that subtraction, because we'll be doing it a lot today. 3,010 minus 2,177, that's 833 kilo of payload in the most expensive 1-ton ute in the country. It isn't a 1-ton ute at all. What's it worth now? Sit down. A 2012 with 342,698 kilometres is advertised at $9,990. The realistic band for a straight one with average kilometres is $15,000 to $19,500, and a 2014 with 165,769 km sits near $26,990. A V6 diesel dual cab with a 7-speed auto for the price of a 10-year-old Corolla. There's a reason, and I'm not going to dress it up. These have a reputation for timing chain trouble. A specialist parts supplier lists chain stretch on the V9X as a known issue on higher kilometre engines, with the failure mode being poor timing, misfires, and engine damage if it's ignored. One owner wrote in to a motoring column after having both chains done on a D40 diesel at 125,000 hours cooler, saying the dealer quoted 2,800. Nissan eventually covered it, despite the vehicle being well out of warranty, and the dealer had another 3 queued up for the same job. Here's where I'll mark my own limits. I could not find an Australian recall covering that chain. What I found was goodwill, handled case by case, and case by case goodwill on a 15-year-old ute is worth nothing to you. So price the chain into the purchase, listen to it cold, and if it rattles on startup, walk. That's not me being cautious for the sake of it. That's the difference between a $17,000 ute and a $17,000 ute plus a $3,000 job. Number 3, and this is the one I find genuinely fascinating, the Mercedes-Benz X350D. Everyone's heard the line that the X-Class is a Navara in a suit, and the 4-cylinder version earns some of that. The V6 doesn't. Look at what Mercedes actually did. They strengthened the ladder frame, reworked the suspension, widened the track, widened the body, built an entirely new interior, and on the X350D, they threw out the Navara's 4-cylinder drivetrain altogether and fitted their own 3.0-litre V6 diesel, a 7-speed automatic, and a full-time dual-range 4-wheel drive system. It also got 4-matic permanent 4-wheel drive and vented disc brakes on all 4 corners, which almost nothing else in the class had. It was built in Spain, not Thailand. Numbers 190 kilo, 550 Nm, 2,190 kilo curb, 3,250 kilo on GVM, 3,500 kilo towing, 6,180 kilo on GCM, 8.8 L 100 kilometers on the sticker, and 12.5 in the real world. And now the payload, which is where I have to be straight with you, because 2 sources I'd normally trust flatly disagree. The magazine that tested it lists payload at 1,060 kg. The car sales specification page for the same X350D power lists 965 kg. I take the lower one because I'd rather be wrong in the direction that doesn't get you a fine or avoid insurance claim, and because the discrepancy is almost certainly about how the tare weight was measured, with fuel, without, with accessories, or without. 95 kilograms of paperwork. Remember that number because in about 15 minutes of listening, it's going to be the whole point. What it costs now, $36,188 for a 2019 Power with 128,334 kilometers, $39,990 for a 2020 with 124,890 kilometers, $51,500 for one with 86,000 kilometer, and $58,990 if you want a 2020 with only 2,850 kilometers. So I want to be really unsentimental about it. A 2019 4-cylinder X250D Progressive with 153,260 kilometers on a dealer's books at $28,990. The catch is not mechanical, it's commercial. The market worked out the pricing was too rich for what was underneath. a Navara in a very impressive suit, and Mercedes dropped it. It was only ever sold in a handful of markets: Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. Why did they kill it that fast? The official reason is volume. My read, and I'm flagging it as my read, not a reported fact, is that the residuals did the killing. A prestige brand cannot have its badge visibly collapsing in value on a used car website every week. And a ute that shed a third of its price in 3 years does more damage to the badge than the profit on it was ever worth. That's a suspicion built on watching the numbers, not a statement from Stuttgart. For you, it means servicing at prestige rates on a body-on-frame ute, and it means checking parts availability before you buy, not after. Some of it is Navara, some of it is very much not. Number 4, the Volkswagen Amarok V6, the 580 Ultimate. If you've never driven one, the thing that gets you is how little it behaves like a ute. The 580 Ultimate was the flagship at 71,990 plus on roads with 190 kW and 589 liters. One road test lists the sticker at 72,790. Power climbs to 200 kW on overboost in 10-second bursts under hard throttle. Torque rise from 1,400 RPM, and it runs a permanent four-wheel drive system with a ZF 8-speed automatic whose lowest gears stand in for low range. Volkswagen claimed 7.3 seconds to 100 kmph. When a magazine took one to a drag strip, the best they managed was 7.7. I like that. Real numbers usually land a bit behind the brochure, and a tester who prints the slower figure is a tester worth reading. Specs that matter for work: 3,500 kg braked towing, 3,080 kg GVM, 6,000 kg GCM, a full-size spare, and a curb weight of 2,244 kg. Same subtraction as before, around 836 kg of payload on the flagship. It also had four-wheel disc brakes, shared at the time with only the Ranger Raptor and the X-Class, now used. A dealer-used 2018 Ultimate 580 starts around $43,900. A 2019 around $47,300, and the trade guides for a 2018 sit lower again, in the $34,210 to $40,700 band. So call it high 30s private, mid 40s from a yard, for what was Australia's most powerful dual cab, the honest caveats. It came on 255/50 R20 tyres, which is a road wheel and tyre package on a vehicle people take up gravel roads, and replacing 4 of those is not a cheap Saturday. There's no low-range transfer case, so if your idea of a good weekend involves crawling over rock ledges at walking pace, this is the wrong ute, and I'd point you at the next but one on this list. And a V6 diesel with a modern emission system does not like a life of 8-kilometre trips to a job site. It wants a run, right? That's 4 of the 7. And if this is the sort of thing you want more of, subscribing is the only way it turns up in front of you again. The next 3 are where the money gets strange. One that lost half its value while being genuinely the best engineered thing here. One you can barely find, and one that refused to fall at all. Then the tax line that explains all 7. Number 5, the Ford Ranger Raptor, the original PX Mecca Y. This is the one that was engineered hardest for a job almost nobody does. Wider track, more travel, box dampers, a coil-sprung rear end with a Watts link instead of leaves, and a body designed to survive being launched off a whoop at speed. The spec sheet reads like an off-road racer's, and the price to match was 74 to 1,990. And then you look at the working numbers and your face falls. Towing dropped from 3,500 kilos to 2,500 kilo, and payload came in at 758 kilos against 900 for a Ranger XLT. Worse, the front and rear axle ratings add up to exactly the GVM, so to use all 758 kilos, you'd have to load the front axle harder than the rear. The realistic usable payload is closer to 600 kilos, and at maximum tow you're down to 518 kilos of payload, or at full payload your maximum trailer is 2,260 kilos. At launch it also arrived without autonomous emergency braking, which was available on cheaper Rangers. Used, it's the bargain of the list if you want the hardware and don't need to carry anything. A 2018 with 167,457 kilometers sits at 36,996. A 2019 with 139,000 kilometer at 42,88. A 2019 with 69,143 kilometer around 49,998. And a 2021 with 95,910 kilometer at $52,900. That is roughly half price for a suspension package you could not build yourself for the difference. 2-litre 4-cylinder in a 2.3-ton truck, is the argument everybody has. The engine started life in the European transit van, which has a hard working life, so there's a decent case that it'll cope. My position: it's fine if it's been serviced on time with the right oil, and it's a grenade if it hasn't. Check the intervals in the logbook, not the badge on the tailgate. Number 6, the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. Short entry because there are barely any here, and I won't pretend otherwise. Hardware first, and it is the real deal. Rock track 4-wheel drive, heavy duty 3rd generation Dana 44 axles, front and rear, true lock lockers at both ends, a 4.1 transfer case giving 77.2.1 overall reduction in low first, and an electric front sway bar disconnect. Nothing else on this list is close off-road. The Rubicon opened at 76,000, 450 tyres plus on-roads, and the engine is the 3.6-litre Pentastar petrol V6 with 209 kW and 347 Nm through a ZF8 speed. Petrol V6, brick aerodynamics, so budget accordingly. Used pricing I won't give you a confident figure on, because the sample is tiny. I've seen a 2020 with Rubicon suspension and lockers, around 41,000 cash, advertised at $47,000, with a note that it had previously been listed as a written-off vehicle for tray damage. That's the flavour of the market. Get an independent inspection and a written-off vehicle register check on any of them, and mean it. Number 7, the Ram 1500 Laramie, the DS generation, with the Hemi. I'm including this one because it's the exception, and exceptions teach you more than examples. These were built in the USA, imported by Ateco, and remanufactured to right-hand drive by Walkinshaw in Clayton, Victoria. The first modern full-size pickup sold here at scale. Each one goes through a 12-hour remanufacturing process using factory-sourced components. A 1500 Laramie was $999,950 when new, running a 291 kilowatt, 556 or 5.7-litre V8 through an 8-speed auto and an on-demand dual-range 4x4 system, rated to tow 4.5 tons, though that 4.5-ton rating depends on the 3.92 axle ratio. Take the 3.23 and you're back to 3.5 tons. Here's the exception: it didn't collapse. A 2019 Laramie with 154,365 kilometers advertised at 75,180 Thailand. A 2020 with 98,449 kilometers at $84,180. That's not dirt cheap in dollars. It's only cheap against the replacement cost, and the sources differ on what that is. One lists the cheapest current 1500 Laramie Sport from 150 to 652, while another puts the 2026 range between 109,950 and 249,950. Take the conservative figure, and a new one still costs comfortably more than the used one twice over. Why did this one hold? Because the buyers never left. Caravan and boat owners need 4.5 tons. Nothing else in that price bracket does it. And a locally remanufactured truck with factory-backed parts has a service network behind it. Demand didn't evaporate when the tax year rolled over, which is precisely the tell. So let's talk about the number that has been sitting underneath every single one of these. You've been told for 20 years that a dual cab ute is a work vehicle. That's why it's shaped like that. That's why it's advertised with a ladder in the back and a dog on the tray. And the reason it's advertised to you that way is not that anybody thought you needed a tray. It's that a vehicle classed as a work vehicle escapes limits that a car cannot escape, and those limits are worth tens of thousands of dollars to the person buying it new. Here's the machinery. If a vehicle is a car for tax purposes, the maximum depreciable cost is $674, and the GST credit is capped at 1/11 of that. A maximum of $6,334, no matter what you paid. Spend $110,000, and around $40,000 of the price is simply never deductible. But the car limit doesn't apply if the vehicle is designed to carry a load of at least 1 ton. No depreciation cap. No cap on GST credits. Same rule shows up again in fringe benefits tax. A dual cab with a designed load capacity of 1 ton or more attracts no FBT where the employee's use is limited to eligible work-related travel. And the test is not a philosophy. It's a subtraction on a compliance plate. Gross vehicle weight minus basic curb weight equals designed load capacity. Under a ton, you fall back to a second test, and this is the one that will annoy you. Passenger weight must be less than half the payload, calculated at 68 coolers per seat. 5 seats is 340 coolers of notional people. So a Ranger Raptor with 655 coolers of payload and 5 seats fails it. It's a passenger vehicle, not a commercial one. Now put the list back on the table. The Cross 8 dropped to 738 squares. The STX550, the most expensive dual cab in the country, 833 Kuwaitis. The Amarok flagship, around 836. The Raptor 758 on paper and about 600 in the real world. Car sales lists the MY18 Ram 1500 Laramie diesel at 735 kili, and the X350D, sold as the premium one-tonner, is either 1060 kil or 965 kil depending on which sheet you read. One side of a line that decides whether a $79,000 purchase is fully deductible or capped. Nobody put that line in front of you as a decision. It wasn't in the brochure, it wasn't on the window sticker. You were sold ride comfort, and the reason the payload went down is the coil-sprung rear ends and the drive like an SUV brief, because makers know buyers use these as family cars. Fine, but understand what happened next. The price of these Utes was set in a market where the buyer's real cost was the sticker minus a deduction. During the peak of it, temporary full expensing let businesses turning over under $5 billion write off assets with no threshold at all. $75,000, $79.99. The number on the windscreen stopped biting. Then it ended. Temporary full expensing was scrapped, and the instant asset write-off came back capped at $20,000, which does not apply to a $30,000 or $40,000 dual cab, let alone an $80,000 one. So the accounting that supported those prices vanished, and the Utes went to a market of people paying with their own money. That's the collapse. Not a design fault, not a quality scandal, a subsidy expiring. You were never the customer at $79,415. You were always the customer at $39,990. And the 6 years in between were somebody else's tax position. The good news, and it is genuinely good news, is that the arithmetic now runs your way. You get the strengthened frame, the V6, the vented discs, and the permanent four-wheel drive at a price set by cash buyers. And you'll never again look at a $90,000 flagship Ute and think that number reflects what it's worth. It reflects what it was worth to somebody with an ABN, and that somebody has already left. I'll say something slightly bigger, and then get back to spanners. There's a skill hiding in all of this, and it isn't mechanical. It's the ability to value a thing by what it does for you rather than by what it costs somebody else. That sounds obvious until you watch how people actually behave in a car yard. A price does half the thinking for us. We assume the $90,000 Ute is the good one because it was $90,000, and we assume the $36,000 one has something wrong with it, because why else would it be $36,000? Neither assumption is doing any work. Both are just deference to a number somebody else set for reasons that had nothing to do with us. Learning to unpick that is worth more than any single purchase. It's the same muscle whether you're buying a Ute, a compressor, a caravan, or a ride-on mower. Ask what's inside it, ask who set the price and what they were solving for. Ask what the market that sustained that price is doing now. Once you can run that, you stop being led around by stickers and you start buying hardware. Good engineering doesn't care what tax year it's in. A thicker chassis rail is a thicker chassis rail in 2019, and it's a thicker chassis rail today. And the only thing that changed is who can afford it, right? Let's put it all in order and let's make it something you can actually use. Here are the 7, cheapest to dearest as they sit today. The Holden Crewman Cross 8, roughly $10,000 to $12,300 for a straight one. More for low kilometer examples. All-wheel drive, live rear axle, 5.7 V8, 738 kilo to payload, 2,500 kilo on brake to towing. Weak point is the 4-speed auto. Buy the one with a transmission cooler and a fluid history. The Nissan Navara STX 550, about $15,000 to $19,500 for average kilometers, mid-20s for a low kilometer 2014, and sub $10,000 if you're brave about a 340,000 kilometer car. 170 kilo, 550 Nemini, 7-speed auto, 833 kilo and payload. Weak point is the timing chains. Budget around $2,800, unless you have proof they're done. The Ford Ranger Raptor, $37,000 to $53,000, depending on year and kilometers. Box dampers, coil rear, Watts link, 758 kilos on paper, and about 600 usable, 2,500 kilo towing. Weak point is the 2-litre if it's been neglected. Read the logbook, not the badge. The Mercedes-Benz X3 M50 power, 36 cm to 58,990. V6, 190 kills, 550 nanometers, permanent 4matic, low range, four-wheel discs, 3,500 kilo towing. Payload either 965 or 1,060 kilograms, depending whose sheet you believe. Weak point is running costs and parts. Confirm both before you sign. The Volkswagen Amarok V6 580 Ultimate, high 30s private, mid 40s from a dealer. 190 kilo, 580 with overboost to 200. 8-speed ZF, permanent four-wheel drive, no low range, 3,500 kilo towing, four-wheel discs. Weak point is 20-inch tyres and a diesel that hates short trips. The Jeep Gladiator Rubicon, thin market, roughly high 40s for a good one, but verify every single example individually. Dana 44s, twin lockers, 4x1 transfer case, sway bar disconnect. Weak point is fuel and scarcity. The Ram 1500 Laramie, $75,000 to $85,000. Hemi V8, 4.5 tons towing on the 3.92 diff. Locally remanufactured to right-hand drive. It's the one that didn't collapse, which tells you its buyers never went away. Now, the part I'd actually want you to keep, which isn't a list of prices, those move. It's a procedure. 4 steps, run it on any used ute you're looking at, not just these 7. Step 1, open the driver's door and read the compliance plate. Write down the gross vehicle mass, then find the curb weight for that exact variant, and if you can, put the ute on a public weighbridge as it sits, with the tray, the bar, the canopy, the drawers, and a full tank. Subtract. That's your real payload, and it will be smaller than the brochure, because the brochure weighed a bare vehicle nobody ever drives. Step 2. Take your real payload and subtract 68 kilo for every seat you'll genuinely use. What's left is what you can put in the back. If that number is negative or close to it once the family's in, you are not buying a work vehicle, you're buying a 5-seat car with an open boot. That's a perfectly good thing to buy. Just don't pay a work vehicle premium for it, and don't plan a trip around a payload you don't have. Step 3, do the ugly bill calculation before you fall in love. Find the single most expensive predictable failure on that model. Chains on the V9X, transmission on the Cross 8, a set of 4 20-inch tyres on the Amarok. Get a real quote from an independent workshop in your town and add it to the asking price. If the ute still looks good with that number stapled to it, it's a good ute. If it only looks good without it, you're not buying a bargain, you're buying a payment plan with extra steps. Step 4. Ask who the buyers were and where they went. If a used price is low because the tax structure that supported it expired, that's your gain and the hardware is untouched. If it's low because there's a known defect and everyone in the trade knows it, that's a warning. Same low number, completely different meaning, and telling the two apart is the whole game. Run those 4 and you'll do better than most people with twice the mechanical knowledge, because most of the money in used vehicles is lost before anyone lifts a bonnet. Here's where I think you end up. Some evening in the next few months, you'll be standing on a dealer's lot in front of something that used to cost 80 grand, and the salesman will say the line they always say, that it was nearly $100,000 new. And instead of that landing on you the way it's meant to, you'll be doing the subtraction on the compliance plate in your head, and you'll know that the 100,000 was never a real number for a person like you. You'll pay what the hardware is worth, and you'll drive home in a ute with a strengthened frame and a 6-cylinder engine for the money the bloke next to you spent on a hatchback. Now, before you go, I want to hear from the people who own these, and specifically I want the boring detail, not the highlight reel. If you've got a V9X Navara, tell me your kilometers and whether the chains have been done, who did them and what they charged. If you've run an X350D past 150,000, tell me what a service actually costs and whether your local independent will touch it. Cross 8 owners, how many transmissions? Amarok people, what did 4 tyres set you back, and be honest about it? Ram owners, I want to know what the remanufactured right-hand drive conversion has been like to live with after 5 years, because that's the question I get asked more than any other, and I'd rather have 20 real answers than my own opinion. And in return, here's the deal. Put your ute, your kilometers, and your specific question in a comment, and I'll answer as many as I can get through. Not a vague thanks, an actual answer. I'll also say this in advance. There will be people who read this list and think I've been unfair to the Raptor, or too soft on the Mercedes, or that including a Ram at 75 grand in a video about cheap utes is a stretch. Say so. Bring the numbers with you. I've changed my mind in public before over a well-argued comment with a weighbridge ticket attached, and I'd rather be corrected by somebody who's lived with one than be right on my own. Reading those replies is genuinely the part of this I enjoy most, and it's where about half of what I know about these things came from in the first place. If this was useful, subscribe. There's a whole thread here I deliberately left alone today, because the same tax line that shaped these 7 Utes is right now shaping what's being built for you next. And the payload figures on some of the newest dual cabs on sale are getting close enough to that 1 ton mark that I've started writing them down every time I see a new one. I don't have the full picture yet. When I do, you'll get it. Until then, read the compliance plate before you read the price tag. It's the only number in the whole transaction that nobody in marketing got to choose.